The Plague of Justinian, pandemic that killed 50 million. In 541 AD, merchant ships carrying grain from Egypt docked at Constantinople's bustling harbors. Hidden in their cargo holds were black rats infected with a bacterium that would launch history's first recorded pandemic. The plague spread through the Byzantine Empire's trade networks with terrifying speed. Constantinople's death toll reached 10,000 people per day at the pandemic's peak. Contemporary historians described symptoms that horrified even experienced physicians. Victims developed massive swellings in their groins and armpits before succumbing to fever and delirium. The disease killed so quickly that families had no time to bury their dead properly. Bodies piled up in the streets faster than burial crews could remove them. The city's normal functions collapsed completely as surviving residents fled or barricaded themselves in their homes. Emperor Justinian ordered mass graves dug outside the city walls and eventually abandoned entire regions as plague consumed their inhabitants. Justinian watched his dreams of restoring Roman glory crumble along with his population. His planned reconquest of Western Europe became impossible as his armies died faster than he could recruit replacements. This pandemic killed an estimated 50 million people across Europe, Asia, and Africa, fundamentally ending the ancient world's demographic and economic structures. Yet even this biblical catastrophe would pale beside what happened when religious delusion drove an entire nation into civil war. The Great Molasses Flood, deadly wave in Boston, 1919. On January 15, 1919, Boston's North End experienced unusually warm weather with temperatures reaching 40 degrees. At 529 Commercial Street, the Purity Distilling Company's massive molasses tank began showing signs of dangerous stress. The steel structure groaned and creaked as the sticky contents expanded in the heat. The company had ignored warning signs for years, including constant leaking that created brown puddles around the tank's base. The structure held 2.3 million gallons of molasses used for manufacturing industrial alcohol. Yet this industrial disaster would pale beside what happened when disease itself became the destroyer of entire civilizations. At exactly 12:30 p.m., the tank exploded with tremendous force. Contemporary accounts describe a 25-foot wall of molasses bursting outward, moving at 35 miles per hour through the crowded neighborhood. The sticky tsunami crushed buildings, flattened cars, and trapped pedestrians in its path. Rescue workers found themselves unable to move through the hardening molasses. Victims suffocated in the brown mess as temperatures dropped and the substance solidified like concrete. 21 people died and around 150 suffered injuries. The cleanup took months of work with salt water to dissolve the hardened molasses coating every surface. The Taiping Rebellion, civil war that claimed 20 million lives. His Taiping Heavenly Kingdom movement exploded across southern China as millions of desperate peasants joined his cause. By 1850, Han commanded massive armies that combined Christian ideology with revolutionary fervor, promising land redistribution and social equality to China's oppressed masses. In 1837, Hong Xiuquan experienced religious visions after failing China's imperial examinations for the fourth time. He became convinced that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, sent by God to establish a heavenly kingdom on earth and destroy the corrupt Qing dynasty. This documented conflict killed over 20 million people, exceeding World War I's casualties and fundamentally altering China's demographic landscape for generations. Yet religious delusion driving mass death would pale beside what happened when scientific methodology itself became the instrument of systematic human destruction. The siege of Nanjing alone claimed hundreds of thousands of lives in savage urban combat. Other major battles saw similar death tolls as both sides adopted modern military technology while maintaining extreme levels of violence and religious fanaticism. The resulting civil war lasted 14 years and introduced unprecedented brutality to Chinese warfare. Entire cities faced complete massacre when they resisted Taiping forces. During prolonged sieges, starvation drove defenders to cannibalism, while attackers employed scorched earth tactics that destroyed everything in their path. The Unit 731 experiments, Japan's secret human testing. During World War II, Japan's military established a research facility in occupied Manchuria under the innocent name Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Unit 731, as it became known internally, operated behind high walls and barbed wire, presenting itself as a public health organization protecting Japanese troops from disease. The reality was systematic human experimentation on an industrial scale. Thousands of Chinese, Russian, and Korean prisoners became test subjects for medical procedures that violated every principle of human dignity. Doctors performed live vivisections without anesthesia to study organ function. They exposed victims to frostbite conditions to test treatment methods, watching as flesh died and fell away from living bodies. Biological weapons testing infected prisoners with plague, anthrax, and cholera. Surgical procedures were conducted on conscious victims to observe their responses. The clinical documentation of these experiments represents one of modern history's most thoroughly recorded examples of state-sponsored medical torture. When Japan surrendered in 1945, American officials granted immunity to Unit 731's leadership in exchange for their research data. The perpetrators lived freely after the war, many becoming respected doctors and professors. Yet while human cruelty reached these documented depths, nature itself would soon demonstrate its own capacity for global destruction. The Carrington Event, solar storm that set telegraph lines on fire. On September 1, 1859, astronomer Richard Carrington observed brilliant white flares erupting from the sun's surface while studying sunspots through his telescope. He sketched the unusual solar activity in his notebook, unaware that he was documenting the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history. 18 hours later, the solar particles reached Earth with devastating force. Telegraph lines across North America and Europe burst into flames as electrical surges overwhelmed the primitive communication networks. Telegraph operators received violent electric shocks that threw them from their chairs. In Boston, telegraph messages continued transmitting even after operators disconnected the power sources, as if invisible forces were driving the equipment. Compasses spun wildly, making navigation impossible. Aurora displays appeared as far south as the Caribbean islands, painting tropical skies with green and red light that confused residents who had never seen such phenomena. Telegraph systems failed across 2 continents, severing communication between major cities. Scientists estimate a similar storm today could cause trillions in damage to satellite and power systems, potentially crippling GPS networks and internet infrastructure worldwide. Yet space weather would prove mild compared to what happened when a single volcanic eruption reshaped the entire planet's climate.